Hey everyone, Corey Calvin here with FCP Euro, and today we are going to be doing something near and dear to my heart, making cars go faster. Here we have an IS38 Turbo, which is a great upgrade if you have wastegate failure, turbo failure, or any sort of turbo issue on any Gen 3 E888 engine, whether that be a 1.8 or a 2-liter. Here at FCP Euro, we provide a great kit, which includes everything you need to install the IS38 Turbo. So we have Denso IKH24 one-step coulter spark plugs. These are a good option when you are upgrading the turbo. I know everyone has their favorite spark plug that they like to run, whether that be the RS7 plugs, the Brisk Silvers, the list can go on, but the Denso IKH24 is a great option. We also include all of the O-rings for all the oil and coolant lines and all of the installation hardware. So you may notice the 034 turbo muffler delete. So we sell the IHI IS38 with the factory turbo muffler installed. As you can see here, it has the 034 turbo muffler delete already installed, which is something that we do offer on our site. So supporting mods when installing the IHI IS38. Typically, I like to see one-step coulter plugs, an intercooler upgrade, and a downpipe with a high-flow cat. So if you have any other questions as far as supporting mods or additional modifications, I would consult whoever is doing your tuning. So now that we've taken a look at the parts required for this job, let's take a look at the tools needed. So tools required to complete this job. As you can see, we do have various ratchets, various sockets, various extensions. I'm not going to mention them all. The ones worth noting are a 12mm flex head long ratchet, O2 sensor sockets, definitely helpful. You're definitely going to need feeler gauges and a spark plug gapping tool. Another very beneficial set of tools are going to be the stubby triple squares and the stubby Allen sockets. Those are going to help immensely trying to get all the little nuts and bolts around the turbo. So that's enough talking about tools. Let's dive right in. So as you can see here, this vehicle has a couple mods already. The integrated engineering intake and the Turbo Smart diverter valve. So we are going to swap over the diverter valve with the turbo swap. While the vehicle is still a little bit warm, I'm going to pop off the cover and remove the coil packs. The reason is when it's warmer, it's a lot easier to remove the coils. So I'm going to take my 10mm socket and remove all the grounds on the coils, and then remove the studs. Now I'm going to unclip the coils. And then popped out nice and easy. So now I'm going to raise the vehicle and drain some coolant out. This is because you do have to remove coolant lines on the turbo and this hard coolant pipe right here. So next I'm going to take out the 8 T25 screws for the belly pan. These do have tabs right here that lock onto the radiator support. So if you can, pop them with your fingers. If not, you'll have to use a flathead screwdriver. So next, easiest way to drain some coolant is to just pop out the coolant temperature sensor. So just take a screwdriver, pop the clip out, then you should be able to wiggle the sensor out and drain some coolant. So just let it drain for a little bit and then put the temp sensor back in. So now that it's done draining coolant, it's important to note that you may need to fish out the coolant temp sensor O-ring from the plastic union right there. So fish out the O-ring, clean it, make sure it's lubricated with some coolant, put it back on the sensor and reinstall. So now I'm going to take my 7mm flex head nut driver and remove the intake as one big piece. So loosen that clamp there, slide it off of the inlet pipe there. We have his HID ballast to one. There's the other one. So I'm going to take off the two 4 mil, 5 mils there. So since the rubber grommets wouldn't come up easy, I just unbolted them. There should be, yeah. Then there's one more hose right there. So next, I'm going to loosen the T30 for the turbo inlet pipe. Rotate it counterclockwise and move it out so I have better access to the PCV hose here. So now I'm going to take a small screwdriver and just lightly pry around the edges to pop it off. So it's just that backside there. It needs a little persuasion. There we go. So as you can see, you need to get in there and pry a little bit against this lip here to pop off the hose. So next I'm going to remove this black hard coolant line that wraps around the engine. So just be careful popping this hose off because you can break the nipple right there. Probably have to get that last. And we'll just remove all the T30s holding it to the cylinder head. The only thing holding it to the wiring harness there is that little tab. There we go. That's that. There it is. Okay. So now I'm just going to unplug the wiring harness and fold it out of the way. So I'm just popping up the little gray locks so I can unplug this. The diverter valve, which, how convenient. Someone already broke it. There we go. Good enough. We can leave that there. So now I'm going to remove the T30 for the charge pipe here. So these are captured. And then I'm just going to remove the 7mm, or loosen the 7mm head on the hose clamp for this boost pipe here. All right, so that's loose. I'm just going to unplug the electrical connector for the wastegate solenoid while I'm here. So next, while we're over here, I'm going to unplug the electrical connector for the wastegate solenoid. So I'm taking off the 5mm Allens for the heat shield, which there are two next to this coolant hose here. One on the bottom by the downpipe there, and then one 10mm nut right there. Well, that was me holding it.
Oh.
There we go. And all that's left is the 10 mil there. So now we can remove the heat shield. So just to reiterate, there are 2 bolts on the side of the cylinder head, 2 bolts next to the coolant flange there, and 1 nut on top of the oil feed line there. So next I'm just going to spray the hardware and let it sit for a little bit. While I remove the downpipe, which is covered in another video. So now I'm going to remove the downpipe. If you already have an aftermarket downpipe installed, you can just unbolt the clamp and move it to the side and out of the way. You do not need to remove it completely. So I'm going to take my 6mm Allen socket and loosen the clamp. So now I'm going to take a screwdriver, pop the clamp so it's loose on this side, and then also loose on the other side. So now you can just put it on the turbo out of the way, and you can start the downpipe removal process. So now we can get the 13mm nuts for the downpipe bracket. There's a couple down here. I don't really remember the easiest way to get to them, so I'm going to fumble through it for a little bit until I get them. So I have the ratchet on one. See if they'll come off. There. There we go. All right. Now, to remove the downpipe, you do need to rotate it a bit. So we're going to have to remove the rear O2 sensor right here before we continue. So I'm just going to free the wires for the O2 sensors. There's that, there's that, there's that. I'm going to unplug my rear O2. There we go. And then my front. So I'm going to leave the rear O2 in the downpipe for removal. Since it's a non-performance pack GTI, you have a small little shield here. So I'm going to take this off so I can get to the last nut on the downpipe bracket. And then we should be able to take off the clamp and remove it. That's that. We won't be needing those anymore. So now I'm just going to take off the 4 13s for this brace right here. All right, so since this factory clamp is all rusted out and there is literally nothing left of the nuts, I'm just going to cut it off. Just slide it out of the way. So all that's left for the downpipe is the 2 13s for the bracket right here. All right, so that's still held in there a little bit. So now, there we go, the downpipe is off of the hanger. Give it a little twist. Watch your O2 sensor wire. And your downpipe is out. So I'm just going to use the torch to heat up the O2 sensor bung, just to make the removal a little bit easier. So I'm going to undo the 13 millimeter on the bottom of the turbo bracket here. So now I am just going to undo a 6 mil on the top of the bracket here. So now, there we go. Remove the turbo bracket. While we're down here, I'm just going to remove the two 12 millimeter copper nuts for the bottom of the turbo right here. So next, the only line that I'm taking off the block is going to be the oil return line, which is right here. So I'm going to remove the 8 millimeter triple square on the block side and pop the line off. All of the other oil and coolant lines I'm taking off from the turbocharger itself. So get a screwdriver under it, apply a little bit of pressure as you wiggle it. There you go. So apply some pressure as you wiggle it, and away we go. So have something ready to catch some oil, because you will lose some. All right, so before we do anything else, I'm just going to remove the front O2 sensor. Just like command button, nice and easy. So now I am just going to take off the T30, or the two T30s for this coolant line here to make it easier to pop it off. So you can wiggle it now. There's that. Now, on the back of the turbo, which you can't see anything, I'm going to get the T30 for the line bracket and the 8 millimeter triple square for the actual line itself. So for the rear coolant line, you need to undo the mount here and then the actual hold down for the line right there. So now we can remove the 10 millimeter stud for the oil feed line. So we'll just loosen that up. And there is one more 8 millimeter triple square holding the line there. Just a quick note, the rear coolant line is still attached. I had a little trouble trying to get it off. So I'm going to see if I can rotate the turbo a little bit and it'll give me better leverage and better access to it. So rotate the turbo and we'll try to tackle it again. So now I can remove the two 12 millimeters for the top turbo stud. There it goes, Matt. It's making me work for it.
There you go.
There it is. Oh, yeah, look at that O-ring. Rip. Yeah, I gotta pop out two of the little valve lift actuators. So these are T25s. So now that I have both turbochargers on the table here, I'm going to swap the lines over and switch over his diverter valve as well. So this is an 8 millimeter triple square. So just breaking that loose. This is also an 8 millimeter triple square. There you go. That's how easy it should be. Swap the O-ring, lubricate it, and put it into place. Install the bolt. So these get torqued to 9 Newton meters. So this also gets torqued to 9 Newton meters. So now I'm gonna swap the OE diverter valve for his Turbo Smart. Good thing it was tight. So the torque spec for the diverter valve bolts should be the same because they are also 6x1 bolts. So I'm just snugging these down and then I'll go back and torque them. Give her a little snuggy snug. So now I'm just going to change the O-rings on the lines that remained in the car. As you can see, they are not in the best of shape. That's why it was such a hassle to remove the lines too. Or pop back on. There it is. So you may notice the O-ring on the oil feed line is black and the O-rings supplied in the kit are reddish orange. They're the exact same O-rings, just a different color. So install it. All right, next step is install our exhaust gasket and put a little bit of anti-seize on these studs here. I have the new exhaust gasket. Put that on. And then apply a little bit of copper anti-seize to the threads. So now we could just throw in the turbo. Slide right in. Just slide right in. So as you put it into position, make sure nothing's getting tangled, and make sure you put the oil return line in the correct position. And then line it up on the studs. So it is, before you go ahead and install it fully, it is very important to note that the electrical connector for the wastegate actuator on the IS38 is facing the cylinder block on this side. The IS20 was pointed out there. So you need to plug it in before you install the turbo. Plug in my wire. Didn't hear it click. I don't like when I don't hear it click. Yep, that's fine. There we go. Now it clicked. So now I can put you back into place. So now we can install all the nuts. So we're just going to lightly tighten these and then install the bottom ones. So these are 12 millimeters. They get torqued to 25 Newton meters. So next I'm gonna lubricate my coolant line. Nope. Take the cap off. Install. So on this coolant line you have the T30 for the bracket that mounts to the compressor housing, and the 8mm triple square that mounts directly to the center cartridge. So the T30 and also the 8mm triple square get torqued to 9 Newton meters. All right, so next I'm going to install the turbo oil drain line. Clean it off. Get it in place. Pop it in. All right, so that is a 8mm triple square, and that also gets torqued to 9 Newton meters. So next we are going to install the oil line, but before that, I'm going to remove the protective cap and pour in our Look-A-Moly turbocharger additive. Now this is great. Basically, it's turbocharger assembly lube, so that the turbocharger is lubricated before the first start, so it does not run dry at all, which is a big issue with turbocharger damage. So I'm going to just cut the cap off, pour it in, and install the oil line. So now we have the stud for the oil feed line and the 8mm triple square for the mounting tab. And these both get torqued to 9 Newton meters. So now we are just going to reinstall the valve lift actuators. So now we are just going to reinstall all the hardware for the valve lift actuators. Now there are a couple ways to remove the turbo. I find that just popping out the valve lift actuators is the easiest way for me. The dog bone mount bolts are included with the kit if you want to go that route, and undo that and tilt the motor forwards a little bit. Now, these don't require a ton of torque because they are a very small fastener, so just be careful tightening them. So now I am just going to put the coolant line back on the barb. There we go. Now I'm just flipping the wiring harness back to where it was. Then plugging back in valve lift actuators. Cam sensor. And the two cam actuators on the front. So now that I put a dab of anti-seize on the O2 sensor, going to install. Good and tight. So now I'm just going to reinstall the heat shield for the turbo. There we go. So we have the 10mm nut on the oil feed line and the 5mm, one here, and then 2 by the coolant line there. So I put a little dab of grease on the end of the bolt so it'll hold it. Now, socket and tighten the mold down. Just remember these are very small diameter screws, so they don't need a lot of torque going into the aluminum cylinder head. Reinstall the cable mount. Now I can flip back over the coolant line and put that into place. Now we can put all the clamps back in their proper spots. I remember this one was fun. There you go. Go. There we go. Now I'm just going to reinstall the 2 T30s for the hard coolant pipe on this side. There's one more right here. Now we can install the boost pipe and tighten the T30 mounting screw right there. Now I'm just going to tighten the T30 for the boost pipe mount, and then the clamp back here on the turbo for the boost pipe. There you go. You can feel the bead all the way around. Next, before we do anything else, I'm just going to pop out the coolant temp sensor again and change the O-ring on it since it is included with the kit. So before we do anything else, I'm just going to fill it with coolant and pressure test it to make sure we have no leaks. Quick leak check. Holding steady. All right, so I'm going to shut my valve. Let it sit for a minute and just watch the reading. Top off the coolant level for now. I'm going to overfill it a little bit. It's the front O2, and then we'll run up the rear O2 when we install the downpipe. Unfortunately, this was pre-broken, so I'm going to put a dab of silicone on this to hold the connector. So next, I'm going to pop off the cap for the turbo inlet and install the turbo inlet. So now I'm going to reinstall the turbo inlet. Make sure you do lubricate the O-ring because they can tear. I'm just going to tighten the one bolt holding the turbo inlet on. There we go. Now you can reinstall your PCV hose. Yep, and I'm going to reinstall the air intake. And his light ballasts. Next, I'm going to reinstall the hardware. Yeah. There we go. Now, don't forget the vacuum line underneath. Some easy assembly stuff, too. There we go. And then I will just reinstall the ballasts. So next, I am going to hook up my scan tool and read the wastegate voltage to make sure it's in the proper range. So I'm just double checking the wastegate voltage before I install the downpipe because it is a lot more difficult to install once the downpipe is in. So we are at 3.45 volts. Which is a little low. Typically I like to see them at 3.6 to 3.8 volts. So I'm just going to adjust it a little bit and we'll go through how to do that. So now the car is up in the air again. I'm taking my 10mm wrench and breaking loose the lock nut for the wastegate. So now I'm going to spin it a little bit while checking the voltage. Let me lock it down there. Okay. What's the final reading? Bingo. So charge air pressure actuator, 3.633 volts, which is exactly where we want it. Now we're going to run the basic setting for the initial adaptation of the charge air pressure actuator. So finished correctly because the voltage is in the specified range and we're good to go. So now we are going to remove the spark plugs to install our one-step coilers. So next, I'm going to take my one-step coiler plugs, and I already know the gap is going to be greater than what I want, so I'm just going to check the gap real quick. So it's loose. I'm going to put them in my gapping tool. Now these plugs, I like to gap them to 24 thou. So I'll just close the gap a little bit. Now you have to be careful with iridium plugs because you don't want to damage the iridium tip. So a little bit more. There we go. I can just feel it dragging. Oh, and I got caught. Yeah, I could just feel it dragging there. So that's good. So just repeat for the other 3 spark plugs. So now I'm just going to run in the spark plugs. So I'm going to torque the spark plugs to 30 Newton meters, which is 22 foot-pounds. So you can see you can feel the washer crushing. And then you have the resistance right there. Now we can install the coil packs. Pop the connectors, 3, 4. So now we can insert the studs and then pop the grounds on. So you have the stud and then there's a nut on top of these. Just going to place in my new exhaust gasket. And raise the car up so we can install the downpipe and the turbo support bracket. Next, I am just going to install the V-band loosely and a little bit out of the way, just so it's there for when I bolt out, just so it's there for when I install the downpipe. I'm going to take my new hardware for the turbo support bracket, slide that into place, and then with the 4 arms that I have, somehow get that started there. There we go. Bingo. So I'm going to tighten the bottom a little bit. There we go. Now I'm going to tighten the top one all the way. And then finish it off by tightening the 13mm bolt on the block side. So now I'm just going to reinstall the rear O2 sensor on our new downpipe. With a dab of anti-seize on it, and snug it down with a 22 wrench. So now I'm going to install the downpipe and twist it into place. And I have the bolts for the exhaust bracket handy. Start those. Here we go. Now we're going to lower the vehicle again and put the downpipe into place. All right, so before we do anything else, I'm going to grab my O2 sensor wire and feed it into place. That's that. So next, I'm going to take downpipe, get the V-band clamp close to the position. There we go. But before I pinch it down, I'm going to rotate it in a good position. That makes it easy to access. I'm just gonna check real quick to make sure it's on 360 degrees. That looks good. I'm just gonna tighten this by hand. Until I feel a little bit of resistance, and then just snug it up. There we go, Matt. modified. All right, so let me tighten these. 13 millimeter. For everyone who notices the missing clamp there, don't worry, we have one ordered. So now, last but not least, we can install the axle heat shield. And they are 16 millimeters. Okay, now I'm just gonna clean up underneath. A little bit of spilled oil, a little bit of spilled coolant. So now we can reinstall this brace right here. Last but not least, we can install the under tray. So now we are ready to start the vehicle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in, I'm going to start it for 10 seconds, shut it off, check for any leaks. If we don't see any leaks anywhere, I'm going to jump back in, start it up, and run it up to temperature. We're going to check the oil feed line, make sure there's no leaks there. And we're just going to glance under the vehicle for any signs of major leakage, which we're clean. So I'm going to start it up and run it for a little bit longer. Now I can reinstall the engine cover. And we're done. I'm going to take this vehicle outside and run it for longer, just to bring it up to temperature and try to burn off all of the machining oils and any kind of other oils that are on the exhaust system. So as you can see, it's not that difficult of a job. It will take probably half a day to a full day, depending on if everything cooperates with you. I just want to reiterate, you cannot run the IS38 with the stock tuning. You need aftermarket tuning. I highly recommend one-step Coil spark plugs, gap to 24 to 26 thou, and a front mount intercooler. So thanks for watching. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. And if you want to see more content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.